You're listening to the Think Unbroken podcast, and I'm your host, Michael Unbroken. I'm an author, speaker, coach, and advocate for adult survivors of childhood trauma and abuse. In this podcast, you will learn how to transform your trauma into triumph, turn breakdowns into breakthroughs, and go from victim to being the hero of your own story. You can learn more at thinkunbrokenpodcast.com, and of course, check us out on Apple Podcasts and Spotify at Think Unbroken Podcast. Chris Janssen, welcome to the podcast, my friend. I'm so excited to have you to talk about this incredible journey of overcoming addiction, overcoming a lot of the troubles one may face in life through the past and even the present. But before we get into that, I'm curious, why should people listen to today's show?
I'm so happy to be here with you. Thank you, Michael, my friend. People should listen because if you're in an addiction or even the beginning of an addiction, it's so important to take the shame off of it and share stories. And that's why I'm here, to share my story and encourage other people to share their story and know their worth. You're worthy if you're addicted, you're worthy if you're not. So
I love that. That is one of the biggest struggles that we battle as humans, is this shame spiral. Obviously, we have people like Brene Brown that really brought that to the attention of the world a few years ago. And it's so funny because I was just looking, I have Dare Greatly right there on my library. And this morning as I was getting ready, I just happened to look at it. It caught my eye. And I was thinking to myself, nobody's been talking about shame recently. Like, it's not really something that is at the forefront. We sometimes have these fads in the world and in society where it's like, here it is nonstop for a while and then it's gone. Why shame? Where does that exist in addiction? And why is that the word that came to mind when I asked you that question?
Shame is useless. There's no place for it. I think guilt there can be reason, if we have guilt, it's usually we think we did something wrong. Shame is I am wrong. So guilt, it might be there to tell us something. We might need to change course, maybe not. And I have actually a assessment in my book to decide, is this guilt helpful or not helpful? Shame, in my opinion, there's never a place for it. It's something that says you're wrong, you're a bad person, and it is a hindrance. And it is, if we want to move forward in anything, we've got to understand how valuable we are, not based on just because we were born with value and worth, not because of anything we did or didn't do to achieve it.
Yeah, let's extrapolate that. I want to go deep into it because a vast majority of the people who are listening to this show, as you know, come from a tremendously traumatic background. And even myself, for one, growing up in childhood, I thought I'm not worthy, I don't matter, I'm not important. There was shame about being homeless. There was shame about stealing food to survive, shame about the abuse I went through, just shame. It's funny because there's this episode of Game of Thrones where they're walking down the aisle and the old queen is like, shame. And I think about that sometimes. And it's like, it's such a brutal experience. Where do you think, is shame a byproduct of our own thinking, or is that some kind of indoctrination from the outside world where this idea that we don't matter starts to become a narrative?
Well, it can be both. I mean, if someone's yelling like in Game of Thrones, right? Or if somebody has a traumatic childhood and is actually being told by people they trust and want to love that they're not worthy, that's going to be your environment. I think I work with a lot of people. I'm a life coach and an author. And I think people that struggle with shame, I think that we just all have different personalities as well. Some of us, I say us because I'm one of these people, are very sensitive. We just were born more sensitive. We hold grudges. We don't forget wrongs easily. I love that Ted Lasso show. And Ted Lasso, the coach, says, be a goldfish, forget things quickly. And that's kind of a key to happiness. Well, some of us, it's not that easy, It's just not that easy. And so a lot of my coaching techniques that are in my books are how do we do that? We know it's a good idea to be a goldfish and not feel, we know it's a good idea to feel worthy and have self-love. And then at the same time, how do you do that when you're not feeling? So kind of unpack where exactly it started, where it's coming from, and change the narrative. And then practice that new narrative, because as we all know, it takes a long time to write a lousy narrative or a lousy story about our self-worth. So it will take time to flip it and have that new one become second nature.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, shame often feels to me like this weird shadow that kind of sits over all the things that you do. And I've even had my own experiences and seen this in people I've coached over the years of the shame spiral occurring even when good things are happening. Mm-hmm. Is that something that you see too?
I do see it. And I do think part of that is a pattern that we need to break and put effort into changing it, like intentional effort. So I think part of it, we just have so many stories and narratives running through our brains subconsciously. Some of them have been there since childhood. And so if we're an adult, maybe as a child, we did need to do a certain thing to survive, or we did need to, we did adapt a pattern where we shamed ourselves or really believed, we had a belief system that we were not worthy, right? As an adult, not a lot of people are teaching us how to change that pattern. So it does take, it's not just a thought, think, have self-love, think better about yourself. We have to be intentional, probably work with somebody else, get in a supportive community, or work with a coach or counselor who can help you flip that narrative, and then intentionally condition with repetition the new narrative. Because when we put something like that in place, the belief, like I'll tell my clients, like, we're going to say it for now. The belief will come later. I know you might not believe this now. We're just going to say it and practice it. And the belief always does come later.
Let's talk about your experience with shame, because I want to create a little bit of context. Where did that begin and what did that look like for you?
I was a perfectionistic child. Everything had to be done well. I think part of that was my environment, and part of it was just, like I said, my personality that I was born with. I think I've always been a growth-oriented achiever type, high achiever. I think there's a difference between a high achiever and a perfectionist. I think an achiever will do whatever it takes to get their goal. And a perfectionist is like, if I don't get the goal, it's trash, right? They kind of, if they're not going to get the outcome they want, they ditch the strategy on the way to the outcome. And that's the type of child I was. It really came down to standards with me as a young person. I set impossibly high standards that were set me up for failure. And so I made happiness like tragically difficult to achieve and impossibly easy, or like very easy to not achieve, right? By the standards I set. Because I was setting, we set these standards for what we want. And if they're outside of our control, well, that is going to be impossible. If somebody says, my goal is I want people to like me. Well, if the rule they have for getting that is, I should say, say they said, I want to be happy. But the rule they set for that goal is people need to like me. I need to be included. Well, now they've set a standard that's outside of their control, right? So if they change that rule to be happy, I need to work out, meditate, whatever it is. Now they set something within their control. So as a kid, I was always setting these impossible standards that were impossible to achieve. And so as I got older, through puberty, I did that. I was an avid runner. I ran cross-country track. I just ran and ran and ran for miles and miles and miles. And then I got an eating disorder. I was trying to control what I could control, because I was sensitive and I felt like my environment was out of control. And so I thought I could control the way I feel by the way I ate. And then when I got older and discovered alcohol, I used that for the same thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, which we're going to step into that here in a minute. But I'm curious because our environments, whether we like it or not, are going to be predictive indicators of success. One of the things that you see often is that your zip code is more indicative of success in childhood than almost anything in the world, right? And so you look at that and you may grow up like me in the hood, or you may grow up in an affluent area, or you may grow up middle class, but you can kind of track that back over a long enough timeline and see outcome. The other very notable variable in these predictive outcomes are your parents' influence. And so I'm so curious, like perfectionism, especially at that level, at that age, historically, you kind of see this input from parents where it's like, you don't get love, admiration, care, support unless X. For me, it was, you don't get love, care, admiration, support unless you are doing shit that is so incredibly bad that we have to pay attention to you, right? So it's an interesting spectrum. And so I'm curious, like, were there parental influences on you that led down that path of perfectionism to the eating disorder, to the running, to the alcoholism?
That's a great question. I'm going to start by saying I haven't cracked the code on that. I've spent a lifetime thinking about it. I think it's a combination.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's a combination of my personality. And I grew up, I'll say this, I grew up with the best zip code, like a very admirable zip code. And I grew up not in the typical, looking at me from the outside, you would not think, oh, this is somebody that fell into alcoholism, right? And so that's what was hard for me to figure out is, why am I doing all these things in my life well, and I can't get this part, this perfectionism, this control, needing to control the way I feel all the time. Why, alcohol, eating, why can't I get that under control? And so I think my parents did a wonderful job. They were very loving, there were high standards. I don't know why I set such high standards on myself. I'm just going to leave it at that.
Sure.
For the parents,
yeah, I get it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I get it. And look, there's what I'm always trying to expose in our human experience is causation and correlation, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like I tread my path and I look at being a very young child, fending for myself, only getting attention when I acted out. And then that leads this path to straight Fs in high school, getting kicked out of high school 3 times, fighting, stealing cars, running from the cops, getting shot at, my best friend's getting murdered, just literally living this insane lifestyle. And it all now, because I understand it deeper, was like, I wish somebody would hug me. Right. And so it's like we seek these things in our life that are often predicated, not even within ourselves. And for me, I started to play this really interesting game, and I was cognizant of it. And the game was like, how much can I get away with? Like, how far can I push the envelope before it actually blows up in my face? Well, I would come to find that happened at about 25 years old, and I just kind of destroyed everything around me. And that's kind of where I'm curious for you. For me, I got high for the first time when I was 12, which is like an insanely young age to be doing drugs. But when I did, it is the most free, even to this day, it is the most free I've ever felt in my life. They talk about this idea that the first time you get high, it's like chasing the dragon after that. And that's what it was in that moment. I think all the things I chased beyond was just seeking and seeking and seeking. Where did alcohol start to come into play for you?
I relate to what you just said so much. And if you take your story and go all the way to the other end of the spectrum, mine wasn't looking to get attention when I did something wrong. It was when you are in an environment that's very controlling, manipulative, and and there's no privacy or really no feeling of kind of acceptance that you're just fine the way you are. People in your business do this, do that, wear this, wear that, look this way, don't say this, that type of thing. That is what of course I didn't understand it at the time, but it drove me to need to control what I could control. And for me, I lived at home with my parents. I couldn't go run around on the streets and get into trouble. I was very controlled. So the only thing I felt like gave me a sense of power was controlling. It started with what I ate, and I became very thin and anorexic, and it was like, in that case, what I didn't eat. And like I said, ran a lot. And then when I was older, I could control the way I felt with alcohol. And I will say I relate to what you said. I say this in the book too, the very first time alcohol touched my mouth, I felt, oh my gosh, everything was okay. I felt okay. I felt worthy. I felt like nobody was breathing down my neck. I felt like I was just okay, exactly who I was, with who I hung out with. It was fine. And you're right. It did become a chasing the dragon after that. And that I write about that in the book. There's a chapter called That First Hits Feeling. The terrible thing about like using alcohol in a harmful way is that you're never, it maybe that lasts 20 minutes. You're never going to get that first hit feeling back, but we chase it and we go on benders trying to chase it, right? And it disrupts people's lives. And that's the sad thing. So I have an exercise in the book walking people through, okay, let's go through the costs of this. Like, what are you actually going to gain? Is it going to be better than that first hit feeling, right? Let's compare that. Let's look at the costs of this and be honest. Like, yeah, that first hit feeling's great. So let's be honest about that. We don't want to not have great things in our life and not feel good. Are there other things that can give us that?
Yeah. And while you're in it, the answer is no. Right?
Right.
While you're in it and you're chasing that thing, the answer is no. And for me, and I've said this openly before, and it's crazy to think about the amount of work it's taken to be able to look at life through a different scope. Uh-huh. It was never actually drugs or alcohol or money for me. It was always girls. Like, that was always the thing. And that was the high that I chased. And to like change the narrative and perspective of that, what I actually learned in that process was letting go of these things that control you and then creating a framework for which you are in control is twofold. Freedom, first and foremost, because that's what we're seeking anyway, right? That's why we do the drugs and the alcohol and the girls and the porn and the video games and the debt. And while a lot, you'll find this a lot in addiction studies, while men will go and spend money on porn, women will go spend money on Amazon or on clothing or
shopping.
On shoes. On shopping. Yeah, exactly. And so it's like to look at life through anything less than the reality of, one, we're seeking freedom through actually the thing that's killing us. And then two, it's really about learning how to love yourself. That's where the game starts to play. But you know this as well as I do. That doesn't start to happen until you hit some really fucking ugly moments. I interviewed Dr. Gabor Mate on this show a couple years ago when he spoke at Unbroken Conference, and he wrote a book called In the Realm of Hungry Ghosts. And that book is entirely about this subject matter. And I've interviewed so many experts just like you, and we all come to the same conclusion. It's like, you're going to have to be in the worst moment of your life to create change. However, before we touch that moment, Chris, I just want you to paint a little bit of a picture, because I think it's really going to help people, because I know who you are and you've had some conversations leading up to this. What was life as an alcoholic actually like for you?
It was awful. And nobody knew it on the outside. Again, I didn't, it's important for people to know you do not have to be in jail, have a DUI, lose your family, lose your job, lose your kids to know to hit a bottom. And so mine still looked pretty darn good from the outside. I was dying on the inside. I hated myself. I had 3 babies. I have 3 kids all in their 20s now. So this was in 2007 when I got sober. So before I found a community, I tried and tried and tried for years to quit drinking alcohol by myself. And I couldn't do it. And I thought I was a monster. I really thought I was a monster. So there were some very dark, low times that probably people are hearing for the first time right now. But yeah, there were definitely times I didn't want to be alive. I thought this will never end. And that, I'm going to say, and I say this in both my books, belief is such a big part of this. This is like my number one coaching tool is helping people with their belief, because that is what helped me get sober. That is like the second I understood this, I was able to get sober in a community of sober people. So my belief was, the fact was the same. The fact was I couldn't stop drinking alcohol. The story I attached to that fact was, it was full of shame. The story was, I'll never get sober. I'm weak. I'm undisciplined. I have no willpower, which was a ridiculous story because those things aren't true in any other area of my life. I have a lot of discipline, a lot of willpower. I'm a high performing person in general. And so the belief became, I am a monster. It was just, I can't tell you, it was just running through my head all the time. I'm a monster. I'm unworthy. I hate myself. And then when I hit a bottom, and my bottom was not like, I'd hit some bottoms worse than the actual bottom, the actual last drunk. So the last drunk was this is important for people to know too. I mean, I was doing 3 kids back to school paperwork, and I was stressed out. That was it. I was stressed out, drinking red wine, and blacked out, passed out. I woke up and decided enough is enough. I can't do this anymore. And I just knew in my gut I was going to die if I didn't figure something out. So I went to a support meeting. I knew no one who called themselves an alcoholic. No one in my family drank alcohol. My parents, their parents, nobody did. So I didn't really know who to ask. So I just went online, found a support meeting, went the next day. And this woman at the meeting said to me, this is where my belief changed. She said, it's not your fault. You're an alcoholic. It's like an allergy. We're going to show you what to do, and you never have to have another drink again. And in that moment, that monster narrative changed, because that moment, the fact was still the same. I'm addicted to alcohol. The story I attached to the fact now became, I'm loved and worthy of sobriety and recovery because I'm addicted to alcohol. So my whole belief system switched. I was no longer a monster in my head. And that was day one of my sobriety right there. All that shame just flew off my shoulders. And I think that's why I help people with the belief. The story and the narrative we attach to a fact becomes our belief, and people attach these things without even knowing it subconsciously. For years, we have these stories about our past, and if we don't bring them up to the conscious and really, like I said, practice, condition these helpful narratives, we can live for years with a terrible belief system that won't serve us.
One of the things that I was thinking about as you were talking about this is, I know personally in my own life experience, having been a high performer, yet trying to mask all of these addictions and seeing that also happening in other people who are high achievers, high performers, you wouldn't know from the outside looking in. And I think one of the very difficult parts about that, and this was from my experience, I didn't really have anybody pull me to the side and smack me in the face and be like, what the fuck are you doing, man? And I'm just wondering, like, what were the people around you saying? Like, is this just so hidden that nobody knows? Or are people trying to intervene with you? What's the relationship like with your children, with your partner? Like, what was happening in that time? Because it seems to me like it would almost be impossible for people not to notice.
That's what was tricky. I had a lot of fun friends, right? Like I had fun friends in college.
Sure.
as young parents, drinking and this was back in 2007. So we didn't have mocktails. We didn't have all these sobriety groups. Nobody was talking about being alcohol free as a health trend. It was just, you have an alcohol problem or you drink socially. And so that was really difficult for me to figure out, like, why was I the only one that seemed like I couldn't do this and wake up and feel fine and just have fun with it like other people. And I write this in the book, I even coached myself to like chill out, take a sip, don't be such a perfectionist, right? I was like coaching myself the opposite way. So I asked my pastor about it. I asked my doctor about it. I asked a good friend about it. And all those people said, oh, and I hired a therapist and asked that person about it. And they all said, oh, you don't have a problem. Maybe a tendency, but not a problem. And so I don't know if I just was asking the wrong people, but my husband, I think it was about to show up in a big way on the outside. I think a lot of those very obvious things would have started happening. And by the grace of God, my husband knew. It was like, okay, yes, now I agree with you. Now I finally agree you do need to stop. But that was the only person. And so because I was drinking at home while I was cooking for the kids, right? Nobody sees that. And so I would have these rules for myself if we were out with friends. Like I would just have one but that if you're having trouble with alcohol, that becomes very hard to do. Like it was a full-time job just trying to moderate my alcohol intake. And so finding this community and knowing I never had to have another drink again was a huge relief for me. Some people enter recovery and hear, I never get to have another drink again. And that's fine too. We all enter when we enter. But for me, it was, you don't have to, because it was exhausting. And I was very relieved and willing to accept help. And sobriety's been like it gave me my life. So to this day, my kids have never seen me drunk. They were babies, so they didn't know that struggle I was going through. So, I got to raise my kids. I got all these wonderful things happened in sobriety. I started writing books. I went back to school and got my coaching certificate. It was great.
It's interesting It's interesting to me how addicts will do anything within their power to justify the thing they're addicted to, like setting rules. Yeah. I had rules too for all of the crazy shit I was doing. It was like, there's a rule. As long as I don't break this rule, it's fine, even though I'm destroying my life. Yeah. And it's interesting because those are kind of the same parameters of the rules that we interpret in childhood as who we are, belief systems, the indoctrinations, the enmeshments, the groomings of who we ultimately become. And it's like, there were rules in place that laid the track for you to become this. And I have this wildly insane realization one day. I was probably like 26 or 27. And I was sitting in my room and I had kind of just started doing the work. I'd had my rock bottom at 25. I was kind of going to therapy, but still bullshitting the guy and just paying him a bunch of money because I was like, I don't know, it's better than nothing, I guess. Had not really told the truth to anyone in my life. And I was sitting in my room and I was like having this crazy moment of realization where I looked at all of the chaos of my life, the chaos of my money, the chaos of my health, the chaos of my relationship. And in that moment, I realized, I was like, oh, you've just recreated your whole childhood.
Mm.
But the rules I put in place justified it. Because that's the thing that we do when we are people who come from, and trauma isn't always like what happened to me. Sometimes trauma is what happened to you. Pressure, expectations, not enoughness. And then you go and recreate that because subconsciously we assess the environment that we create as normative. And what do we want as human beings? We need homeostasis and normality so that we feel safe. The craziest part of that, and this is why I always yell at my clients when they say this, is like, we believe that thriving in chaos is safety. And then one day you go, wait a second, that's fucking stupid. And so I'm just so curious because I can't help but think about this. Like, in these moments, when you're having these conversations, was it really so cut and dry as I went to this support group, I had this awakening, I changed my belief, and then everything was different? Like, was it that like cut and dry, or because for me, it was a fucking war. The next 4 years of my life, I was like going to battle. So what was that like for you?
Hey, Unbroken Nation, we'll be right back to the show, but I wanted to let you know that you can grab a copy of my first book, Think Unbroken, Understanding and Overcoming Childhood Trauma, for free. If you go to book.thinkunbroken.com, you can download the PDF ebook version of the book and get everything that I know about the baseline of healing trauma for free, downloaded to your email right now. Just go to book.thinkunbroken.com to download your copy of Think Unbroken, Understanding and Overcoming Childhood Trauma for a PDF for your phone. Again, that is book.thinkunbroken.com.
Yeah, the war happened for me before that meeting. I was at war. I was just battling by myself and asking people and wasn't really getting anywhere. So that belief that I told you about, going from being a monster to being a worthy woman deserving of recovery, that did change in an instant. It wasn't all unicorns and daisies after that, because of course your body's addicted to alcohol. So it's going to take time, right? For me, it was 90 days. I just remember that first 90 days being really, really, like, I felt like I was going to crawl out of my skin. But for me, it wasn't so much physically. I'm very active, so I like to run and stuff. I think that helped a lot. It was in my mind. And it was exactly what you said about this. When we've grown up and normalized chaos, like, I grew up as someone who was constantly living in my head. I had no idea how to relax. Like, all through college, my friends didn't understand how I had always been very social, had a lot of girlfriends. They could wake up, have their coffee, relax. I was just wake up at 6 o'clock and hit the ground running. I just didn't know how to relax. And so when I got sober, you hear a lot of the word serenity, right? So there's people talking to me about serenity, and I was so confused. I had no idea what that meant. And I started to feel really bored. And I realized I didn't just drink when I was bored. I did all kinds of things when I was bored, because I hate being bored. I used to. In the past, I hated being bored because I didn't think it was normal. And so I would, eat or run or drink alcohol or like lots of other things too, just to not feel my feelings. And when they explained to me, I said, I'm kind of bored. They said, that's serenity. So it was that. Then I got it. I was like, oh, okay. It's okay to normalize serenity. I don't always have to be creating chaos just to feel normal. And then my head freed up, and there was a lot of room for other stuff. I never understood why people drink tea. Like, I drink espresso, and I still drink espresso, but I didn't understand. I didn't understand yoga. I didn't understand tea. I didn't understand any of these things that my friends seemed to be enjoying. And after probably not right away, but after about a year of sobriety, I started understanding downtime. And I didn't get what self-care was. And then I was like, oh, okay, self-care because I was doing things on the outside. I take care of myself. But for me, self-care now is my mental state. What am I taking time to be bored or to relax or to read a book? I used to feel guilty for reading books, So that was a big shift for me.
Yeah, I relate. The literal thought I'm having as you're talking about this just now, I'm like, people who grow up in high pressure situations, whether from parental or from environment, me, it was environment. If we don't make it through this, we die. Like literally, that's not, that's not hyperbole. It's like, you got to fucking show up every day into chaos or you might not make it. Some of my friends are proof of that. Some of my family are in prison for life. And I cannot help but remember these moments where it was like, people be like, dude, you are so fucking high strung all the time. Why can you never chill out? Why can you never relax? Why are you always running two companies? Why? And that might be true even today in some capacity, but much, much more toned down, I will say. And I realized I was sitting on a ferry crossing islands in Thailand when I was like 31. And it was the first time in my whole life I felt relaxation. I was like, oh, this is the thing that people are always talking about. Because I didn't understand it either. I was like, you're reading books, you're fucking wasting time. Like, you're taking a nap. What is wrong with you, loser? Right. And I would have I wouldn't say this to people, but I'd have this internal dialogue about it. And I came to realize, like, no, the loser was me, because I wasn't taking time to be connected to myself, to peace, to serenity, as you just kind of laid out. And that's such a difficult bridge to cross. And what's so interesting, in the same way that alcohol is a depressant, so is weed. Weed was always my drug of choice. And it was like, well, what does weed do? Well, if you're a high-strung, overachieving, multiple business running mom, raising 3 kids, chaotic environment, running all the time, blah, 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 it pulls you down. It takes the edge off. And so it's like, yeah, if that's the thing we're seeking, right? Going back to this idea of freedom, it's like the drugs, the alcohol, the orgasms, the money spent, it all is in the seeking of that thing. But what's so interesting and what we've been talking about, obviously, is there's like a price to pay for this. There are what I like to call the taxes, and the taxes have to be paid. Like, whether you like it or not, there's something coming on the backside of every one of the decisions that you make. And the decisions you are even making today are tied in directly to your future, whether you like it or not. And I know one of the things that you talk about that's so beautiful is that you have to choose commitment over this craving. And the craving, interject anything we're addicted to. We all got our things. I got my things too, right? But it's like you interject that. So how do you start to change that commitment? Especially biologically, from a chemical perspective, from a embodied perspective, like I am literally addicted to the feeling. And then from the mental, emotional perspective, like what is the transition of this commitment and taking the cravings, putting them where they're supposed to be, not leaning into the impulse, but instead like directing yourself?
Great question. Have a supportive community. Before that, though, the number one thing, and this is so fundamental, fundamentals are key, right? This doesn't have to be coaching, self-help. It doesn't have to be rocket science. So the having a why. So know why you want what you want. At this point in my sobriety, knowing why I don't want to drink is far more important than me figuring out why I did drink, right? I've already done that work. Great. I know some reasons I drank. I get it. I need to constantly, every day, read my why of why I don't drink. Okay. And so that is all that, and a supportive community for support and accountability, letting other people say, you're not the only one. and you can't rationalize and talk yourself into things. Those two things are going to get you through the cravings, because even if you say you're just starting on this journey, it's going to take a while. It's going to take 30 days or 60 days or 90 days. It could take longer. Every body is different, right? So when that craving hits, if you don't know why you committed to who you want to become, then addiction will win. Addiction is a beast. It will win 100% of the time. So we're smarter than our addiction, though. I'm smarter than alcohol, but I just have to remind myself of that. And so I have to remind myself that vision of who I want to become. Who is this sober person? Why am I choosing sobriety? And then when the craving hits, you get in your community and know your why.
Let's say that someone has those things, and yet they keep falling off, and they keep making mistakes, and they keep, they're so trapped in the shame spiral. And it's like, even though they're taking one step forward, they're taking a million steps backwards. That was my experience from 26 to 30. I was like, holy shit, dude, like, you're doing all this work. And I kept just being like, for what? Well, at 39, I have a very different understanding of the for what. Like, it's very clear, oh yeah, that work eventually pays off. But it's really hard to see the future in the present. And even though we're trying to pull the future into now, that's not where we're at. If you're looking at a $100,000 debt, 150 pounds overweight, being sick all the time, alcoholism, being an absentee parent, blah, 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 the list goes on and on. It's really hard to see 14 years later, 10 years, 5 years, even a year later. So when people are making these commitments and they're falling off, what do you give them? Like, what is the mechanism? What is the framework or function that they can leverage to just keep going? Really, I guess, is the question. Like, how do you just keep going?
Right. Leverage is the key word there. So if it's too far out and I get that, if it's too far out to see who you want to become 150 pounds later, or, that, like, one day at a time is a great way to live, right? 1 hour at a time. But get leverage on yourself, or have a supportive friend hold you accountable to having this leverage of, if you're not going to look at who you want to be, ask yourself, what is the cost of not making this change? And sit with that. Write it down, tell a friend, like, condition that in your brain. And so we operate, on pain and pleasure. So be associated with the pain, the cost of not getting clean or sober or losing the weight or whatever it is, not getting where you want to go. Because people change when the pain of staying the same becomes greater than the pain of changing. So we constantly, I do at least, I constantly have to be asking, doing what we want to do and getting where we want to go can be really hard for us achievers. Sometimes it's fun and easy, so we don't think about it as much. But when it is hard, then we go, oh yeah, this feels hard, so it must not be what I'm meant to do. This must not be my path. That's not necessarily true. So we want to ask ourselves, what's the cost of not doing it? And sit with that.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's, no pun intended, a very sobering reality check. Because it's like, we can predict our future. Like, you show me your actions today, I will unequivocally tell you what your future is going to look like. And you hear people say that, especially in this silly personal development world, right? But it's so true. It's like, the work you're putting in, the harvest that you will reap is going to be entirely based on the things that you do today. And one of the things I think is so interesting is, and I want to go back to this for a second, you were talking about this idea about rules of addiction. And I'm like, okay, cool. So if we can set rules in addiction, right, which we talked about because we both have done this, and so have probably many of the people listening, how do you create rules and standards for the life you actually want? That's, for me, where my life changed. Values, standards. Like, I don't want to get up at fucking 6 o'clock in the morning, 5:45. I hate it, but I do it. I don't want to go to the gym every day. I hate it, but I do it. I don't want to eat clean. Do you know my favorite thing in the world, Chris? My favorite, you don't know because I never told you. My favorite thing on planet Earth is to sleep until about 11, get high, eat some gummy bears, order a pizza, play video games, probably hook up with a stranger or watch porn, go spend my money on shit I don't need, not talk to my brothers, don't go to the gym, eat ice cream and pizza again for dinner, get high again, probably go out with my buddies for some drinks, wake up, rinse and repeat.
Right. And I love that. I love that you are saying that. I say that in the book, and I work with clients that tell me. I love how you just said that with no shame. You are there. You have no shame in saying that. And that's what I want people to know. Just because we want certain things, all that says about us is that we're human, right?
Exactly.
It's just what I work with people to do, and where I'm going with the book is I also want people to take that a step further and say, okay, great, Michael, I want you to be happy and have all the things you want. I want you to have the life you want. And I can see that that brings you happiness. If you do that the next day and the next day and the next day and the next day, where's your happiness level going to be then? And is that what you want? Right? Probably not.
Mm-hmm.
So that is going back to getting leverage on yourself, pain and pleasure, and asking what is the cost of not doing this, and then walking people forward, like fast forward through the outcome. Which one's going to be more fun? You're probably having more, like in the moment, yeah, that's more fun. As a lifestyle and a lifetime of fun, which one do you think is more fun?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and what's so crazy is you've got to recognize you're chasing dopamine and oxytocin and all of these feel-good chemicals in those moments. And it's instant gratification, which I would argue addiction is probably worse than it's ever been, just because we're walking around with fucking addiction devices in our hands. And you think about this, and that life that I just laid out, like that was literally my life. Like, go look at me, 18 to 25, that was my life. That's how I ended up hitting rock bottom. And then really what you kind of just laid out, I was like, is this who I want to be? Like, if I fast forward my life and my future on my deathbed, and this was before I was having these personal development things, and self-help wasn't really in my life. And I was just like, I don't want this shit. This is kind of gross. You're not living up into any potential. And so my why initially was, see if you can just do it. Just see if you can change your life. That's where it all started. Just see what would happen. And then came the rules and the standards. And those rules and standards, that was what elevated me. That's where life really shifted. If people don't have rules and standards in their life, first, I'd love for you to define them, because I think that they're two different things. What is a rule? What is a standard? And then two, how do people create these or find them?
Yes. Yeah, I used to make rules in addiction, like you said, right? I had spreadsheets for my drinks, right? So
Of course you did.
Yeah.
Like any good high performer.
Exactly. So what if we took that energy and fueled it for something different? And so these rules and standards, what we just talked about, I call that the bigger one, right? Like, yes, I don't want to have pizza and gummies and all that same things you do, but I want ice cream. I would love to have ice cream every day. That's something I want. What I don't want, though, is I also want, my bigger one is a lifestyle where I have energy and I feel good and don't have brain fog. And so it's not that I don't eat ice cream, but I don't eat it as much as I want, right? So that's kind of how you weigh the bigger want and the smaller want is, what's the bigger want, right? If we're going to want lots of things in life, but what do we want the most? What is the lifestyle we want? Who do we want to be? Who do we want to become? So with that in mind, when I'm looking at rules and standards, I'm thinking of, but when I say rule, I'm thinking of when we set this bigger want, this goal for ourselves, what rule did I put in place for reaching that goal, right? So if my standard is, let's say my standard is to feel happy. Let's just make it easy. My standards to feel happy and have a lot of friends. Well, what is the rule that I made for myself for achieving that standard? If the rule is they have to be a certain type of friend, they have to be friends that maybe I've set these rules like these friends have to like me, these friends have to do X, Y, and Z. Now I'm making these rules, and those rules are what are important to look at because those rules have nothing, are not within my control. Those are in the control of those other people, right? So if I set standard and the rules I have for those standards are outside of my control, then I set a standard. I'm setting myself up for failure because I set a standard I won't be able to achieve. Maybe I will, but that would be luck. It's a gamble. So I work with people to have rules, like change the rules. I'm big on like the sticking to the outcome and tweak the tactics, tweak the strategy. Don't ditch the whole outcome. Like people, high achievers especially will, like if they don't get the outcome they think that they wanted or that they set for themselves, they think, oh, I wasn't meant to get it. And they'll ditch the whole thing when really we just need to take the strategy and tweak that. It's like in rock climbing, right? My son's a rock climber and you get to you commit to getting to the top, but the route on the way is called a problem. So the problem has to be reworked depending on the weather, your physical ability, all kinds of things. And those are the rules. So you have to adjust the rule, the strategy, or the tactics to get to your commitment. Don't throw in the towel before the miracle happens, though, as they say, right? Don't ditch it before you get, because a lot of times it's just that 2 millimeter shift. It's just like you're 98% of the way there, and then a high performer will throw in the towel because they think, instead of just tweaking the strategy for getting there.
Yeah, you see that all the time. And my thesis behind why that happens is because that shame starts to creep in. Mm-hmm. Oh, you didn't hit a home run, shameful. And I'm like, yeah, you might give it 90 days. Maybe give it 180 days. Maybe give it a year. Because there were moments and times like I had raised my standard and set rules in my life at 26. Like, don't be a fucking asshole. Take care of the people in your life. Don't get drunk every day. Don't get high. Don't go cheat on your girlfriend. Don't. There was a lot of don'ts, right? There were some do's, right? There was like, go to the gym, do yoga, meditate, therapy, personal development books, blah, blah, blah. Work on the business, work on myself. And it was like, I would set these rules. I had these standards and I would fuck up. I'm like, I would just fuck up. I was just human. And I think one of the problems is so many people hold themselves to the identity of the standard that when they lose it, when they don't hit that goal, when it isn't always 100% because it's not, and I wish people could learn to let go, now they're less than, they don't matter. They're back in the shame spiral. And now we're back at the beginning of the conversation. Mm-hmm. But there's something about the power of in the letting go, which is a word that I'll use that I know that you use a lot in grace. And I think that is the thing that gives you ultimately above all that freedom, because I've come to realize, even though I would love to be the most unbelievably perfect, in alignment, spiritual, great, unbelievable man that I believe in my head that I am and that I most often will be, sometimes I fuck up because I'm a person. And sometimes I fuck up bad and sometimes I fuck up just moderately. But like, it happens. And I've learned to leverage that word, that choice, because I believe it's a choice and a decision to give oneself and others grace. And that is why I can still keep going. So I'm wondering from your perspective, like, what does grace mean? And if grace is this thing about favor and giving to oneself, how do you navigate grace in this conversation of these moments of learning while also navigating the shame that probably still exists for most people.
Yeah, I don't think grace and shame can coexist. I think grace is unmerited favor. It is whatever your spiritual background, or whoever's listening, whatever their spiritual background is. For me, it's my Creator has extended grace, meaning I am loved no matter what. I'm loved at my worst. I'm loved. And I think once we work with that, like when you were just talking and you said, I'm doing this and then I fuck up. Well, that, like, I work so much with people and the language, it stung, because I think, who says you fucked up? Like, you're saying you fucked up. Well, what did you actually do? Like, I would be unpacking that and going, is that a fuck up, or are we just shifting the strategy a little bit here? Right? So I think when we really understand grace, that you have been loved from the time you were in the womb. Okay. You were valuable. You're worthy. We all have different upbringings. Yours was chaotic. Right? There was a lot of stuff, a lot of things from the outside being thrown at you, telling you you are not worthy. You're not valuable. And you're just a little boy. So how are you supposed to understand how, right? But now you're an adult, so it's not wrong that we had shame. It's not wrong that we thought these things, or that we did what we needed to do to survive and then acted out in the way we did. That is not wrong at all. Now that we're grown-ups, and we know better, it's just we get to ask ourselves, is that what I want? Like, is that, like we talked about, is that the lifestyle I want? Well, no, you've answered that for yourself. No. So now you're doing this. Sure, some of those little wants, sure, it'd be great to have gummies and eat pizza and all that. But what your bigger want is the life you're living right now. So you're doing it. You, over time, as you grew up, came to learn that you are valuable, you are worthy, no matter what. And it's not because you became this man that you are now. You were, even if you didn't. Even if you were sitting in jail or you passed away from an addiction, that doesn't make you any less worthy or valuable. It's just that once people understand that, actually, we don't really want to be stuck in an addiction. We don't really want to wake up hungover. We don't really want those things. If we're really honest with ourselves, we just think we're not worthy of the life we want. So understanding grace, being able to accept it, is fuel to go after the life we really want, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so, did that answer your question? I could go on and on about grace, but
yeah, it's interesting. One of the things, and the reason I keep asking you to kind of define what these things mean, is because I'm a fervent believer in that words carry power, but that power is inherently based on our own definition of what that means. So you hear fucked up and you have this experience. I say it, I have a completely different experience, right? And so I think the biggest thing for people is to recognize, like, this isn't ubiquitous. Like, we all have to choose what things mean and interpret their meaning and their impact into our life as the individual. And that's one of the things that, it again, ties to this idea of freedom, because you have to, in some sense, be a trailblazer in your own life. Like, take the advice, take the information, do with it as you please. But ultimately, it's like you're the one in control. The way that you shape your narrative, the way that you decide who you're going to be, to give yourself grace or compassion and set your rules and eliminate shame from your life and understand all of the dominoes that have fallen to this moment. Like, that is the thing that makes you human. And I love what you said about knowing that you are loved and worthy just because you exist. Yes. And I will add an and as an asterisk to this, just because this is my own personal experience. It's yes, because obviously, but it's also like a lot of self-worth comes through the actual showing up. I don't know a lot of people who are down in their worst moment who feel worthy. And for me, that didn't shift until I started showing up. And so I'm wondering, and I want to stay in this for a second, did worthiness shift for you in your own life when you started showing up for yourself?
That's really good. Yeah, that's like what came first, the chicken or the egg? Like, do we figure out?
Totally.
Yeah, do we figure out how to get shame off us and then show up? It all goes hand in hand. For me, it was back to that when the shame flew off in that first meeting when somebody said it's not your fault. That for me in that moment was the shift where I could. It was like I physically felt like before that someone had been pushing down on my shoulders. I just felt small. And in that moment, I felt like all of that lift off. Like, I do lots of hard things. I've had 3 kids. I'm raising babies. I do a lot of hard things. I can do this. I just wasn't doing it because I felt like I wasn't worthy of it, or I felt like I just didn't think I could. So I think, but that now that would never have happened if I didn't look that meeting up on the internet and showed up. I mean, the subtitles of both my books are How to Show Up for the Life You Want and How to Show Up for the Sober Life You Want, because I'm huge on that. If we don't, you have to show up, not just when you want to. You have to show up when you don't want to. And then things happen. So I think it's a combination. There's no magic formula.
Right. Which is why I'm doing a podcast with you and not playing video games and eating gummy bears right now. That said, thank you so much for this space and this time. I mean, it's been a very powerful and potent conversation. And my hope is that people will take some gems out of this and recognize there's a path to this journey. Before I ask you my last question, where can everyone find you and especially learn about the new book?
ChrisJanssenCoaching.com is my website. I keep that updated with everything, all the things I'm offering and where to find me, how to get the books. You could buy the book right there. Also, GraceYourselfBook.com we've got a limited amount of VIP upgrade packages available, and they're available just between now and launch day. So I wrote a workbook. I'm doing workshops. I did a master class, if I'm encouraging people to please pre-order the hard copy. And if you pre-order in bulk, you get all these other good things too. I can do a book club with your group. It's all detailed out on GraceYourselfBook.com or my website, ChrisJanssenCoaching.com.
Amazing. And folks, remember, go to never said folks on this podcast. I have no idea why I just said that. Keep that in. Guys, remember, go to thinkunbrokenpodcast.com, look up Chris's episode for that and more in the show notes. That must have been my Indiana coming out. We'll have to work on that in therapy. My last question for you, my friend. What does it mean to you to be unbroken?
I love this title, Unbroken. I don't believe the second sentence of my first book is you are not broken and you don't need fixing. I just think we're whole people and shit happens and there's all kinds of stuff. And that's what makes life fun and interesting. I don't know if always fun, but interesting for sure. And being unbroken is accepting and knowing that, and being a nation, as you call it, of people, of like-minded people who believe we're worthy.
Yeah, I could not agree more. I mean, you are. There's a little bit of proving in there because that's how we build confidence. But if you're willing to show up for your life will show up for you. Thank you so much for being here, my friend. Unbroken Nation, thank you guys for listening. Please share this with someone if you found it impactful, because you never know what might change or save their life. Check me out at Michael Unbroken on social. And of course, thinkunbroken.com to learn more about our weekly coaching community. Take care of yourself and each other. And until next time, my friends, be unbroken. I'll see you.
Thank you so much for listening to Think Unbroken. Please share this episode with someone who could use it and help us move forward in our mission of ending generational trauma in our lifetime. And if you would, please take 5 seconds to pop on iTunes or Spotify, hit that 5-star, leave a review, and you can also reach out to us on social at Michael Unbroken or at Think Unbroken. And of course, you can check out our YouTube channel at Think Unbroken. Thank you for being a part of Unbroken Nation, my friends, and until next time, be unbroken. We'll be right back to today's show, but before we do, I want to let you know that you can get a free copy of my first book, Think Unbroken, Understanding and Overcoming Childhood Trauma, when you leave a review for the podcast on Apple Podcast, either on desktop or on your phone. All you have to do is go to Apple Podcasts, look up Think Unbroken, click follow in the top right, and then go and leave a review at the bottom. And when you leave that review, screenshot it and send it over to book.thinkunbroken.com, where you can upload your contact and mailing information, and we will send you a free copy of this award-winning best-selling book, absolutely free, including shipping. Just go to book.thinkunbroken.com to upload your screenshot review from Apple Podcasts for the Think Unbroken podcast. And until next time, my friend, be unbroken. I'll see ya.